The first time my husband tried to erase me, he did it in front of a judge. He leaned close, smiling like he was about to win a prize, and whispered, "Today is my best day. I'm taking everything from you." Before I begin, if you care about stories like mine, please like this video and subscribe. It means more to me than you know. Because some of us don't get believed until strangers decide our pain is worth listening to. The courtroom lights were too bright, the kind that make you feel exposed even when you've done nothing wrong. My hands were folded in my lap, but they wouldn't stop trembling. I kept rubbing my thumb against my wedding ring out of habit, then remembered I wasn't wearing it anymore. I had taken it off 2 weeks ago and placed it in a jewelry box like you put a dead bird in a shoebox, gentle and shocked that something once alive could become so still. Richard sat beside his attorney in a crisp navy suit, hair combed neatly, posture straight. He didn't look like a man ending a marriage. He looked like a man closing a business deal. And me? I wore a plain cardigan and the same low heels I wore to my sister's church bake sale last month. I tried to look steady. I tried to look like I hadn't spent nights staring at the ceiling, asking the dark, how can someone who once held you in their arms treat you like a problem to be disposed of? His lawyer stood and spoke in that cold, tidy language people use when they don't want to admit they're describing a human being. Mrs. Lawson has no significant income, no assets in her name, no documented contribution to the marital business. No contribution. My heart gave a strange little crack at that, like a porcelain cup with a hairline fracture, still standing, still holding tea, but never quite the same. I wanted to say, I contributed my life, I contributed my body after childbirth, my patience during his long silences, my late-night budgeting when money was tight, my hands scrubbing kitchen floors, and my voice soothing our son after nightmares. But I kept quiet, because I grew up believing a woman's strength is in her silence. I'm old enough now to know that's half true and half the lie that keeps women trapped. The judge asked if I understood the terms being presented. My throat tightened. The word understand felt cruel. How do you understand being replaced? Then I saw him, my son Daniel, sitting behind Richard with his wife Emily. Daniel's eyes were fixed on the floor. Emily's chin was slightly raised, like she was watching a play she'd already read the script for. Richard leaned in again. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he murmured, soft enough that nobody else heard. "You walk out clean if you behave." Behave. Like I was a child, like 27 years of marriage made me a pet that needed training. I took a shaky breath and looked at the judge's desk. That's when something small happened, so small I almost missed it. A clerk placed an additional file on the judge's bench. The judge flipped it open. The judge's expression shifted, not dramatic, just a pause, a tightening around the eyes, like a man noticing a crack in a wall he assumed was solid. Richard's smile twitched. For the first time that morning, he looked uncertain. He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. His attorney continued talking, but Richard's fingers were now tapping the table. When court ended, people moved like nothing sacred had been destroyed. Papers shuffled, shoes clicked, a bailiff yawned like heartbreak was routine. Richard walked ahead of me, shoulders loose, satisfied. Daniel followed him. Emily held Daniel's arm like she was guiding him, like she was the steady one now. I called out softly, "Daniel." My voice didn't sound like me. It sounded smaller, like my years had shrunk into a frightened girl. Daniel stopped, but he didn't turn fully. "Mom," he said, tight, not warm, not gentle, tight. I swallowed. "Where am I supposed to go?" He exhaled like he'd been waiting for that question so he could get it over with. "Aunt Carol said you can stay with her for a bit. Just For a bit. For a bit. That's what people say when they don't want to admit they've made you temporary. Richard turned around, just long enough to land the humiliation properly. He spoke louder now, so the hallway could hear. She'll be fine. She always lands on her feet. She's good at that. That sentence stung because it wasn't true. I didn't land. I endured. I survived. I held my breath through decades and called it love. A few people nearby glanced at me, quick looks, then away, like my pain was contagious. Emily didn't speak to me. She gave me a polite little nod, the kind you give an acquaintance at the grocery store, then she guided Daniel toward the exit. I stood there alone for a moment, staring at the beige hallway walls. My ears rang with silence. The air smelled like copier toner and cheap coffee. I walked outside and the wind hit my face, cold and sharp. It smelled like winter coming. I pulled my cardigan tighter, realizing I didn't even have my house key anymore. Richard had changed the locks last week, said it was for safety. Safety. It's funny how cruelty always wears a respectable outfit. I didn't call a taxi right away. I just stood at the steps and watched cars pass, like they were all going somewhere important, like the world had places for people. My hands shook. I pressed my palms against my cheeks to warm them, but my skin stayed cold. I made myself walk, one step, then another, until I reached Carol's apartment. My sister opened the door, and her face crumpled immediately. "Oh, Maggie," she whispered. Something in her voice broke the last piece of my strength. My knees gave out, and I sank onto her living room carpet like I'd been unplugged. I didn't scream. I didn't wail. I just sobbed. Quiet and deep, like the sound was coming from a place older than my body. Carol wrapped me in her arms and rocked me the way she used to when I was a teenager crying over a boy who didn't call back. Only now I wasn't crying over a boy. I was crying over the man who had once promised, hand on my stomach when I was pregnant, "I'll take care of you forever." That night, Carol made me chamomile tea. The mug sat between my hands, warm at first, then slowly turning lukewarm as I stared at the wall. My thoughts kept circling one question like a moth around a porch light. How did my own family become the place I wasn't welcome? My phone buzzed once, a message from Daniel. "Please don't make this worse." Worse? Like I was the problem. I stared at the message until my eyes burned, then I set the phone down, took a shaky breath, and remembered Richard's whisper, "I'm taking everything." But if that was true, why did he look scared when that file appeared? I lay down that night in Carol's guest bed, listening to the building creak. The radiator hissed softly. Somewhere, a neighbor's TV played a laugh track, and I realized something that made my stomach twist. If Richard was nervous, then Richard had something to lose, and I had a feeling he'd fight dirtier once he realized I might not stay silent. Later, Emily came to Carol's apartment with a plastic container of brownies like this was a friendly visit. Her perfume arrived before she did. Clean, expensive, confident. The kind of scent that says, "I'm doing well," without speaking. Carol opened the door and didn't invite her in right away. Carol's always been like that. She doesn't pretend when she's angry. Emily smiled anyway. "Hi, Carol. I just wanted to check in on Maggie." Check in. Like I was a package delayed in the mail. Emily stepped inside, carefully polite, and her eyes landed on me sitting on the couch, cardigan buttoned, hands folded like a schoolgirl waiting to be scolded. "Hi, Maggie," she said sweetly. Not Mom, not Mrs. Lawson, just Maggie, like we were equals, like she hadn't helped push me out of my own life. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Hello, Emily." She set the brownies on the coffee table and sat across from me, posture perfect. "I know this is hard," she began, eyes soft. "But softness can be a costume." She continued, "Richard didn't want it to go this way. He needs peace." Peace. That word again. Peace always seems to mean women should disappear quietly. Carol crossed her arms. Peace? He humiliated her in court. Emily's smile didn't crack. "Carol, please, we don't need hostility." Hostility? as if reality was the aggressive one. Emily turned back to me. Maggie, I really think you should consider settling. Dragging this out will only hurt everyone. Everyone. Funny how everyone never includes the woman who sacrificed her entire adulthood. I stared at Emily. Why are you involved in this so much? I asked softly. She blinked, then smiled again. Because I care about Daniel, and Daniel is stressed. He has a family to think about. Daniel's family. Not me, not his mother. Emily leaned forward slightly. And honestly, you don't really have a financial claim. Richard built the business. He paid the mortgage. Legally. That word hit like a slap because it was meant to. It was meant to shrink me. I felt a hot sting behind my eyes. I raised his son, I whispered. I kept our home running. I held him together. Emily sighed like I was sentimental. I'm sure you did your best, but love doesn't equal ownership. Ownership, as if I'd asked to own him, as if I wasn't asking for fairness, just dignity. Carol stepped closer. Emily, you brought brownies. Are you here to comfort her or threaten her? Emily's eyes flickered, just once, and in that tiny flicker I saw the truth. This wasn't kindness. This was a warning wrapped in sugar. Emily stood up, smoothing her sweater. Maggie, I'm saying this gently. Don't contact the bank. Don't start digging. Richard has already handled everything. My stomach dropped. I hadn't mentioned any bank. I hadn't told anyone about the uneasy feeling I carried. So how did she know what I might do? Emily smiled like she'd said something helpful, then walked to the door. Take care, she said. Carol shut the door behind her and muttered, That girl is ice. But I was frozen for a different reason, because Emily's words confirmed what my instincts had been whispering. This divorce wasn't just an ending, it was a plan to leave me with nothing and make me feel foolish for even asking why. That night, I lay awake hearing Emily's sentence over and over. Don't start digging. If there was nothing to hide, nobody would fear digging, and somewhere deep in my chest, a small, stubborn flame lit up. Not anger, truth. Because I suddenly knew, if I stayed quiet, I would disappear for real.
My lawyer called the next morning. Her name was Rebecca Collins, and she had the voice of a woman who'd seen too many wives get crushed by men who knew how to smile in public. Maggie, she said, I need you to come in today. There's something you should see. Carol drove me. The sky was low and gray, the kind of day that makes everything feel heavy. My hands kept twisting in my lap. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest felt tight, like an old bra clasp that won't loosen. Rebecca's office smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. She handed me a folder and watched my face carefully. Do you recognize these? She asked. I looked down at the documents. Bank statements. Account numbers. My name printed on the top. My pulse thudded so loud I felt it in my ears. I didn't open this, I whispered. Rebecca nodded. That's what I thought you'd say. Carol leaned forward, eyes wide. What is this, Becky? Rebecca tapped the page. An account opened years ago in Maggie's name. Significant deposits and transfers, some of them close to the date Richard filed for divorce. My mouth went dry. I never had access to any accounts, I said. Richard handled everything. Rebecca's expression softened, just enough to show she felt sorry for me without pitying me. Maggie, she said gently, your signature appears here. I stared at the signature and my stomach turned. It looked like my name, but it wasn't my handwriting. I shook my head slowly. That's not how I sign. Rebecca slid another page forward. We requested additional records. The bank sent something to the court. That's the file that landed on the judge's bench. So that was it. That file. The one that made Richard's smile twitch. Carol's voice shook with anger. He used her identity? Rebecca nodded. It appears assets were moved and disguised. It may qualify as financial misconduct. Misconduct. Such a clean word for something so dirty. I sat there staring at the papers while memories surfaced like bubbles in water. Richard pushing documents across the kitchen table years ago. Just sign, Naggy, it's taxes, it's boring stuff. Daniel showing up once with Emily, asking me to sign something quickly. Mom, it's just insurance paperwork, we're in a hurry. My throat tightened. How many times had I signed without reading, because trust felt like love? Rebecca asked, "Do you remember any specific time Daniel or Emily were present when you signed something?" Carol's voice hardened. "Oh my God." I whispered yes, my voice sounded like it was coming from someone else. "They brought papers." Rebecca exhaled slowly. "That matters." I stared at the folder, my life reduced to printed ink and loopholes. I felt humiliation rise in me, not because Richard stole, but because he made me feel stupid for believing in my own family. Carol reached over and covered my hand. "You're not stupid," she said. "You're loyal. There's a difference." I swallowed hard. My eyes burned. Rebecca leaned forward. "Maggie, this changes the case, but it also changes how Richard will behave. Men who hide money don't like being exposed." A chill ran through me. Because I knew Richard's pride. I knew how he punished people with silence, with coldness, with calculated cruelty. I asked, "What do we do now?" Rebecca's eyes held mine. "Now we followed the trail." I nodded, slow. Outside, the wind picked up and rattled the window slightly, like the world was knocking, and as I stood to leave, I felt the first real shift inside me. Richard thought he'd taken everything, but he'd left behind one thing he underestimated: evidence. And evidence has a way of turning best days into nightmares, because I had no idea what I was about to uncover, and who would be standing at the center of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Carol's guest room was dark, but my mind kept flashing bright. Richard's whisper, Daniel's avoidance, Emily's warning, Rebecca's folder. I lay there, listening to rain tap the window gently, like fingertips trying to get my attention. The sound was soft, almost comforting, but my chest still felt like it was full of stones. Around 2 a.m., I sat up and opened my suitcase. I didn't know why, I just felt pulled toward it, like my own hands were searching for something my mind hadn't admitted it needed. At the bottom, beneath folded clothes, I found a small cloth pouch, old, faded, the kind you keep things in when you don't trust drawers. Inside were papers I hadn't touched in years: birth certificates, my marriage license, Daniel's baby photos in an envelope. And then a key, small, silver, plain. My breath caught. I remembered it suddenly. The key to the little lockbox in the basement of our house. Richard always called it business storage. He'd told me, half joking, "Don't go snooping down there, Maggie, you'll get bored." Bored? Men always assume women aren't curious, only compliant. The next morning, Carol insisted on coming with me. We drove to the house I'd lived in for nearly 3 decades, the one where I'd measured Daniel's height on the pantry doorframe, the one where I'd baked birthday cakes, where I'd cried quietly in bathrooms after arguments. When we arrived, my stomach twisted. The curtains were different. A new wreath hung on the door, like someone was redecorating my life while I was still alive. The front door was locked, of course, but the side entrance to the basement, Richard had forgotten about that one, or maybe he never imagined I'd have the courage. The air inside the basement smelled like dust and cold concrete. My steps echoed. Carol stayed close. We found the metal cabinet in the corner, a small lock on the front. My hands trembled as I slid the key in. It turned. The click sounded too loud in that quiet basement, like a confession. Inside the cabinet were papers, envelopes, and a small fireproof box. Carol whispered, "Open it." I hesitated, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I was afraid of what it would mean. I opened it anyway. Inside were documents, property paperwork, investment statements, and something that made my blood go cold. A trust document. Not Richard's. His father's. I stared at the page until my vision blurred. Then I read the line again, slower. A portion of the family business set aside for me. Not for Richard and his heirs. For me. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to escape. Carol grabbed the paper and read it, eyes widening. "Maggie," I whispered. "He told me there was nothing left after his dad died. He said the business was complicated." Complicated? No, not complicated. Hidden. My fingers clutched the paper so tightly the paper wrinkled. I could feel the truth pressing into my skin. And then, footsteps. Heavy. Fast. Coming down the basement stairs. My entire body froze. Carol's eyes snapped toward the staircase. The light above flickered slightly. And then Richard's voice, sharp, furious, cut through the basement air. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I turned slowly, clutching the trust papers like they were my only oxygen. Richard stood on the stairs, and behind him, Daniel. My son's face looked pale. His eyes weren't angry. They were scared. And in that moment, I knew, deeply, painfully, Daniel hadn't just been a bystander. He'd been part of the lock on the door. And what came next would shatter everything I believed about my own child.
Richard stepped down into the basement like a man entering his own courtroom. His face was red, not the red of sadness, the red of someone whose secret just got daylight. He pointed at the papers in my hands. "Put those back." Daniel stood behind him, hands clenched, eyes darting like he wanted to disappear. I swallowed hard. "These have my name on them," I said, voice trembling. Richard scoffed. "That doesn't mean anything. My father didn't know what he was doing." Carol stepped forward, voice sharp. "Your father knew exactly what he was doing. He protected her." Richard's eyes flicked to Carol with contempt. "This is none of your business." "It became my business when you threw my sister out like trash," Carol said. Richard's jaw tightened. He turned to Daniel, and I saw it, just a quick look, but it was a command. Daniel took a step toward me. He didn't look at my face, he looked at the papers, like they were the problem, not what they represented. "Mom," Daniel said quietly, "please, give it back." Give it back. That sentence cut so deep I felt it in my teeth. I stared at my son. "Back?" I whispered. "Daniel, it was never his to begin with." Daniel's lips pressed together. His eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. He looked like a man torn between guilt and loyalty to the wrong person. Richard barked. "Don't argue. You don't understand business. You never did." I laughed once, soft, broken. "I understood enough to keep you fed while you built it." Richard stepped closer. "You think you can waltz in here and steal after you embarrassed me in court?" Embarrassed, like I'd done something shameful by asking for fairness? Carol snapped. "You embarrassed yourself." Richard ignored her and stared straight at me. "You want to fight me? You'll lose. You have no home, no money, no support." Then he leaned in, voice low and cruel. "No son." The words hit like a slap. I felt my eyes burn. My throat tightened. I looked at Daniel, searching his face for disagreement, for defense, for something. Daniel flinched, but he stayed silent. Silence can be louder than shouting. I whispered, "Daniel, did you know about this trust?" Daniel's eyes widened, and for 1 second he looked like a little boy again, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He started. Richard cut him off sharply. "He doesn't need to answer you." Need. Like I didn't deserve truth? Carol grabbed my arm gently. "Maggie, we should go, now." I nodded, still frozen inside. I slid the papers into my purse with shaking hands. Richard lunged forward, but Carol stepped in front of him. "Touch her," Carol hissed, "or I'll call the police." Richard stopped, not because he respected boundaries, but because consequences scare men who live on control. As we moved toward the stairs, Daniel finally spoke again, voice cracking. "Mom, Emily said—" Emily. There it was, the puppet master behind the curtain. I turned and looked at my son fully. "What did Emily say, Daniel?" Daniel swallowed. "She said if you get any of this, you'll take our future." I felt my heart sink. So they'd painted me as greedy, as selfish, as a threat, when all I'd ever been was the glue. Richard sneered. "See, even your son knows." Daniel's face tightened. "Dad, stop," he murmured. Richard snapped. "Stay loyal." Loyal? To what? To theft? To lies? We climbed the stairs. Each step felt like leaving a grave. At the top, I paused and turned back. I saw the basement, the cabinet, the box, the secrets. And I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about what they believed I deserved. Nothing. Outside, Carol pulled me into the car. My hands were sweating. My breath came in short bursts. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." My stomach dropped, because now it wasn't just Richard's pride at stake. Someone else was involved. Someone who didn't want me looking too closely, and I had no idea how far they'd go to keep me silent.
Rebecca met us at the bank the next morning. The lobby was cold, bright, too clean, the kind of place that smells like polished tile and quiet power. People stood in neat lines holding paperwork, living normal lives, while mine felt like it was splitting at the seams. We sat across from a bank officer named Miss Harrington. Her hair was tight in a bun. Her expression was professional, but her eyes looked tired, like she'd seen too many families destroy each other over money. Rebecca slid paperwork across the desk. "We're requesting records for an account opened under Margaret Lawson's name. We believe there was misuse of identity and unauthorized transfers." Miss Harrington nodded slowly. "I understand." She tapped on her keyboard, and the clicking sounded sharp in the quiet office. My palms were sweaty. I wiped them on my cardigan and tried to keep my breathing steady. After a moment, Miss Harrington looked up. "Mrs. Lawson," she said carefully, "this account has been active for years." I whispered, "But I never used it." Miss Harrington's eyes softened slightly. "That may be, but according to our files, it was opened in person." Rebecca leaned in. "Do you have documentation of who was present?" Miss Harrington hesitated, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. She opened it and slid a page toward us. My stomach flipped. A witness signature. A copy of an ID. My son's name. Daniel Lawson. My vision blurred. It felt like the room tilted. Rebecca's voice stayed calm, but I heard the steel in it. "So Daniel was present at the opening?" Miss Harrington nodded. "Yes, listed as a witness." I put a hand to my chest like I could physically hold my heart together. Rebecca asked, "And who conducted the major transfers?" Miss Harrington flipped pages. "Most transactions were authorized digitally. The device logs connect to Mr. Richard Lawson's registered phone. Richard used my name. My son opened the door. Richard moved the money." And then Miss Harrington said something that made even Rebecca go still. "2 months ago," she added, "the beneficiary of the account was changed." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Changed to whom?" Miss Harrington slid another page forward. "Emily Lawson, my daughter-in-law." I stared at her name until it stopped looking like letters and started feeling like betrayal carved into paper. Rebecca exhaled slowly. So the intent was to funnel marital assets through Maggie's identity and place them under Emily's control. I couldn't speak. The humiliation was too heavy, not because of the money, because of what it said about me, that they saw me as so disposable they used my name like a tool. Miss Harrington lowered her voice.
Mrs. Lawson, she said, I'm sorry, but there's more. More? I looked up, numb. She continued, there are notes on the account indicating you were considered non-cooperative and that statements should not be mailed to your marital address. My skin went cold. So they planned it all quietly, neatly, years in advance? Rebecca gathered the papers, eyes focused. This is powerful evidence. But evidence doesn't erase pain. As we stood to leave, my legs felt weak. I walked slowly, like my body was carrying not just my age, but the weight of realizing my son had been in the room while my life was being stolen. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright. Rebecca touched my arm gently. Maggie, do you want to proceed? I swallowed hard and nodded, because at that moment, something inside me shifted, not into revenge, into survival. And just then, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from Daniel. Mom, please meet me alone. I need to tell you something you don't know. My stomach dropped, because I knew that tone. That wasn't a request. That was a confession about to happen, and I had a feeling the next truth would change the direction of everything.
Daniel asked me to meet him at a small diner off Route 9, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes burnt no matter how much cream you add. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He looked smaller somehow, older. Like guilt had aged him faster than time ever could. He stood up quickly. Mom. That word still held power, even after everything. I sat across from him, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The smell of fried food made my stomach turn. My body knew this conversation wouldn't be gentle. Daniel didn't waste time. Emily planned it, he said, voice shaking. Not just the account, everything. I stared at him. Planned what, Daniel? He swallowed. The divorce, the timing, the money. She told Dad you were getting unpredictable, that if he didn't act fast, you'd take half and ruin us. Ruin us. I closed my eyes briefly. So I became the enemy. Daniel nodded, tears pooling. She kept saying you were manipulating me, that you were playing the victim. I let out a hollow laugh. Funny how people call pain manipulation when it inconveniences them. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, Dad promised Emily something. My chest tightened. What? The business, he said. He told her it would eventually go into her family's control. That's why she pushed so hard to move assets quietly. I felt a deep, aching sadness, not shock, because now everything made sense. Emily wasn't just cruel, she was strategic. Daniel rubbed his face. I didn't realize how bad it was until I saw Dad yelling at you in the basement, and then he threatened me. I looked up sharply. Threatened you how? Daniel's voice dropped. He said if I didn't back him, he'd pin the forged signatures on me, say I did everything. My heart clenched. So you were trapped? Daniel nodded. Emily said if I lost Dad's support, she'd leave, that I'd be nothing. Nothing. That word followed us like a curse. Daniel reached into his pocket and slid his phone across the table. I recorded things, messages, voice notes, Emily's, Dad's. I stared at the phone like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Why are you giving this to me? I asked quietly. Daniel's eyes met mine. Because you didn't raise me to destroy my own mother. Tears slid down my face then, slow, silent, unstoppable. I didn't touch the phone yet. I just sat there, breathing, steadying myself. I said softly, Daniel, this will change everything. Your marriage may not survive this. He nodded. I know. I placed my hand over his. And you? He swallowed. I'll survive.
but I can't live knowing I helped erase you." We sat in silence for a long moment, coffee cups between us, life humming around us like nothing monumental was happening. Then I picked up the phone, and I knew, deep in my bones, Richard's best day was officially behind him, because truth had witnesses now, and truth is patient, but ruthless. The next hearing felt different the moment Richard walked in. He looked confident, too confident, like a man who hadn't yet realized the ground beneath him was already cracking. He glanced at me and smirked. That same smug smile. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Rebecca stood when the judge called the case. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we are submitting new evidence regarding intentional financial concealment, coercion, and third-party manipulation." Richard's lawyer stiffened. Rebecca played the recordings. Emily's voice filled the courtroom, cold, calculating. "Once the money's moved, she won't be able to touch anything. She won't even know where to look." Then Richard's voice. "She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She always does." A murmur rippled through the room. Richard's face drained of color. The judge's eyes hardened. Rebecca presented timestamps, transfers, device logs. Then Daniel stood, my son, hands shaking, voice steady. "I participated under pressure," he said, "but once I realized my mother was being erased, I refused." Richard shot up. "You ungrateful—" "Sit down," the judge snapped. Silence slammed into the room. For the first time, Richard wasn't controlling the narrative. He looked small, exposed, cornered. The judge spoke slowly. "Mr. Lawson, this court does not look kindly on deception, coercion, or exploitation of trust." Richard's mouth opened, but no words came. His smile was gone. Not cracked, gone. When court adjourned, he didn't look at me. Not once. And as I walked out, I realized something powerful. The man who humiliated me in public was now being dismantled by his own words. And this wasn't even the final ruling. Victory doesn't arrive quietly. After that hearing, whispers spread. Friends stopped calling, invitations disappeared, people smiled differently. I heard rumors. "She's greedy. She's destroying her son's family. She should have just let it go." Let it go. Women are always told to let it go when injustice benefits others. Then one evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Enjoy your moment. People like you always pay in the end." I stared at it calmly, because she was right about one thing. Someone always pays, but not always the woman who stays quiet. Rebecca called later that night. Richard's business partners are withdrawing. Audits are starting. I sat back, exhaling slowly. Karma was no longer whispering. It was walking. Richard came to Carol's house unannounced. He looked exhausted, unshaven, desperate. "I'll give you money," he said flatly. "Just stop." Stop. Like justice was a faucet he could turn off. I looked at him through the screen door. "You already tried to stop me. You failed." His eyes burned. "You're destroying me." I answered quietly, "No, I survived you." He stood there, trembling. Then he said the thing that sealed everything. "I never thought you'd fight back." I met his eyes. "That was your biggest mistake." He left without another word, and for the first time in decades, I slept peacefully. The final ruling came on a clear morning. Fair asset division, back payments, legal accountability. But more than money, recognition. The judge said Mrs. Lawson's contributions were foundational. Foundational. I walked out of that courtroom lighter. Not because I'd won, but because I'd been seen. Daniel hugged me outside. "I'm sorry it took me so long." I kissed his forehead. "Just don't forget again." Emily filed for separation days later. Richard's best day had cost him everything he thought was guaranteed. Richard once whispered, "I'm taking everything from you." But he was wrong. I walked away with my truth, my dignity, my voice, and something even stronger, myself. If there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this. People who try to erase you are terrified of who you become when you finally stand up. I wasn't loud. I wasn't cruel. I didn't seek revenge. I simply stopped disappearing. And that was his real nightmare.